Picture this, a single family, not royalty, not military conquerors, just merchants. Yet by the 1860s, they controlled 70% of all opium flowing into China. They built the skyline of Shanghai. They dined with British kings. They were called the Rothschilds of the East, and that comparison insulted them because they considered themselves even greater. But here's what history books won't tell you. This empire was built on human suffering so vast, so calculated, that it triggered wars, toppled dynasties, and turned millions into addicts. This is the story of the Sassoons, a Jewish family exiled from Baghdad who didn't just rebuild their lives. They rewrote the rules of global trade, manipulated empires, and created a fortune so controversial that even today, their legacy remains buried beneath the glittering buildings that still bear their name. They weren't kings or conquerors, but they ruled an empire all the same. The year is 1829. Baghdad, jewel of the Ottoman Empire. David Sassoon stands in his family home watching everything he's known crumble around him. His father, Sheikh Sassoon ben Saleh, had been one of the most powerful men in Baghdad, chief treasurer to the city's pashas, with a network of merchants spanning from Istanbul to Persia. The Sassoons had been in Baghdad for over 2,000 years, their roots deep in Mesopotamian soil. But power in the Ottoman Empire was a dangerous game. When a new governor arrived, corrupt, paranoid, and hungry for money, the Sassoons became targets. David was threatened, held hostage, extorted. The family that had once counted silver for sultans was now running for their lives. In 1828, David made a choice that would change history. He gathered his wife and 4 children, left behind his siblings and the only home they'd known, and fled, first to Persia, then to the bustling port city of Bombay. They arrived as refugees, Baghdadi Jews in a strange land, speaking Arabic and Hebrew in a city of Hindi and English. David had connections, yes, his father's merchant network stretched across the Middle East, but in Bombay, he was starting over at 40 years old. Most refugees in this position would have been grateful just to survive. David Sassoon had other plans. He learned Hindustani within months. He studied the cotton markets with obsessive precision, understanding not just prices, but seasonal patterns, shipping routes, and which traders could be trusted. He began small, textiles from India to Persia, spices from the Persian Gulf to Bombay. His reputation for honest dealing spread quickly in the tight-knit merchant community. But David Sassoon was still small-time, just another trader in a city full of them. Then, in 1839, everything changed. Britain went to war with China, and the Sassoons saw their opportunity. The First Opium War wasn't really about opium. It was about money, specifically Britain's massive trade deficit with China. The Chinese had tea, silk, and porcelain that Europeans desperately wanted, but China wanted almost nothing from the West except silver. The British Empire was hemorrhaging precious metal, and they needed something, anything, that Chinese people would buy. They found it in opium. Grown in Bengal under British control, opium was smuggled into China by the ton. When the Chinese emperor tried to stop it, destroying 20,000 chests of British opium in Canton, Britain responded with gunships. The message was clear: free trade would be enforced at gunpoint. When the Treaty of Nanking was signed in 1842, China was forced to open 5 ports to foreign trade, pay massive reparations, and cede Hong Kong to Britain. The opium floodgates were now legally open. David Sassoon recognized what most merchants missed. This wasn't just about one war. This was the beginning of a new era. China, with its hundreds of millions of potential customers, was now accessible, and he had something they wanted. In 1844, David sent his second son, Elias, to Shanghai. Elias was only 24 years old, but he was brilliant, tenacious, and utterly ruthless when it came to business. He scouted locations, made connections with Chinese merchants who could move product inland, and sent back detailed reports. The Sassoon strategy was genius in its simplicity. They bought opium directly from Indian farmers, cutting out British middlemen. They operated their own fleet of fast ships, opium clippers, ensuring product moved quickly and efficiently. And they established houses in every major city: House of Bombay, House of Shanghai, House of Hong Kong. David placed his sons at the head of each branch. Like the Rothschilds in Europe, the Sassoons created a family network that could move money, information, and product faster than any competitor. But while the Rothschilds dealt in banking, the Sassoons dealt in addiction. By the 1860s, their dominance was absolute. They had pushed out British giants like Jardine Matheson and Denton Company. Conservative estimates put their control at 70% of all opium entering China from India. 70%. In raw numbers, they were moving over 4,000 metric tons annually by 1858. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to 1 year's worth of total global opium production between 1995 and 2005. Every single year. When David Sassoon died in 1864, he left his 14 children a fortune of £4 million, worth approximately $3 billion in today's money. One competitor described their reach: silver and gold, silks, gums and spices, opium and cotton, wool and wheat. Whatever moves over sea or land feels the hand or bears the mark of Sassoon and Company. But the opium was always at the center. Always.
Elias Sassoon didn't just sell opium in Shanghai, he built Shanghai. When he arrived in the mid-1840s, the city was barely more than a fishing village with potential. The Treaty of Nanking had opened it to foreign trade, but infrastructure was primitive. Elias saw what Shanghai could become, a hub connecting China to the world. He invested in docks, warehouses, and communication systems. In fact, he installed one of the first telegraph systems in China, giving the Sassoons a massive advantage in tracking opium prices and market movements. While competitors were days behind, the Sassoons knew market conditions in real time. On the Bund, Shanghai's famous waterfront, Sassoon House rose as a monument to the family's power. The building still stands today, now the north wing of the Peace Hotel. It became the family's Asian headquarters, a symbol of their transformation from refugees to empire builders. But the Sassoons built more than just commercial buildings. They established schools, hospitals, and libraries. David Sassoon, deeply religious, insisted that every branch maintain a rabbi and observe Jewish law. Even his sons, traveling deep into China's interior, would bring live chickens to ensure kosher meals. This created a strange contradiction. A family that observed Shabbat so strictly they closed their offices every Saturday, yet dealt in a drug that was destroying Chinese society. They built hospitals in Bombay while their product filled Chinese opium dens. They donated generously to Jewish causes. About 0.25% of every trade, whether profitable or not, went to tzedakah, even as Chinese families watched their loved ones waste away. The Sassoons defended themselves vigorously. They argued that opium was no worse than tobacco or alcohol, that it had legitimate medical uses, that demand would exist regardless of their involvement, even placed a poppy on their family coat of arms,
a bold declaration that they felt no shame. But Shanghai's transformation into a global city was undeniable, and the Sassoons were its architects. By the 1870s, Shanghai rivaled major European cities in commerce and culture, and at its heart was Sassoon money, Sassoon buildings, Sassoon power.
As the Sassoons grew wealthier, they began a new conquest: British high society. David's sons started moving to London, drawn by the empire's beating heart. They anglicized their names. Abdullah became Albert, and in 1872 he was knighted by Queen Victoria. Sir Albert Sassoon of Kensington, the first East Indian merchant to receive the freedom of the City of London. A Baghdadi Jew who had arrived in Bombay as a refugee's son was now dining with British royalty. His brothers, Arthur and Reuben, became fixtures in the Prince of Wales' social circle, bonding over horse racing and lavish parties. They bought estates in Brighton and Scotland, hosting weekend gatherings that mixed Jewish merchants with British aristocrats. It was social engineering on a grand scale. Then came the ultimate validation: marriage into the Rothschild family. In 1887, Sir Albert's son, Edward, married Aline Caroline de Rothschild, daughter of Baron Gustave de Rothschild of Paris. The Sassoons, the Rothschilds of the East, were now literally family with the Rothschilds. Ironically, the Sassoons reportedly disliked the comparison. They saw the Rothschilds as nouveau riche, recent arrivals to wealth, while the Sassoons traced their lineage back centuries in Baghdad. Being called the Rothschilds of the East was almost an insult in their eyes. But the nickname stuck, cementing their status as one of the world's most powerful families. Edward Sassoon was elected to Parliament. His son Philip became Under-Secretary of State for Air and Military Secretary to Field Marshal Douglas Haig during World War I. The family that had fled Baghdad was now helping run the British Empire. Yet this integration came at a cost. As the Sassoons became more English, they became less entrepreneurial. The British aristocracy of the late 19th century looked down on grubby money-making. Inherited wealth and landed estates were respectable. Actively working in business was not. The Countess of Warwick captured this perfectly when explaining why some aristocrats resented the Sassoons. They had brains and understood finance. Understanding finance was apparently vulgar.
While the Sassoons built their empire, China burned. By the late 1800s, an estimated 10% of China's population was addicted to opium. 10%. Compare that to the modern opioid crisis in America, considered a devastating epidemic at under 4% of the population. Entire communities were destroyed. Families spent their life savings feeding addictions. Productive members of society became unable to work. The silver that should have circulated through China's economy instead flowed out, payment for endless chests of opium. The Qing dynasty recognized the existential threat. In 1839, Commissioner Lin Zexu had tried to stop it, writing an eloquent letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to her moral reasoning. The letter never reached her. Some say it was lost in transit, others suggest it was deliberately intercepted. But Lin's words cut to the heart of the hypocrisy. Your Majesty has not before been thus officially notified, and you may plead ignorance of the severity of our laws, but I now give my assurance that we mean to cut this harmful drug forever. Instead of cutting the drug, Britain cut down Chinese resistance with superior military technology. The Opium Wars weren't just military defeats, they were psychological devastation. China, one of the world's oldest civilizations, was brought to its knees by foreign merchants and their poison. The Treaty of Nanking and subsequent unequal treaties stripped China of sovereignty, created foreign concessions where Chinese law didn't apply, and forced the country to compensate Britain for the cost of being invaded. China had to pay the Sassoons and other merchants for the opium that had been destroyed to protect Chinese citizens. This period became known as China's Century of Humiliation, running from 1842 to 1945. And at its beginning stood the Sassoon family, controlling 70% of the trade that started it all. Modern historians and ethicists still grapple with the Sassoon legacy. Were they simply businessmen operating within the legal frameworks of their time? Or were they knowing architects of human misery on an unprecedented scale? The family's extensive philanthropy, schools, hospitals, libraries bearing the Sassoon name, doesn't erase the suffering their fortune created. It might make it more complicated, more uncomfortable, but not less real.
The beginning of the end came in 1907. Britain, China, and India signed a treaty to gradually eliminate the opium trade over the following decade. The drug that had built the Sassoon Empire was now being phased out. The Sassoons should have seen it coming. They should have diversified earlier, invested more aggressively in cotton mills, banking, and real estate. But by this point, later generations had lost the entrepreneurial hunger that drove David and Elias. They were too comfortable, too British, too invested in aristocratic leisure to adapt quickly enough. One Sassoon who did try to adapt was Victor Sassoon, David's great-grandson. Taking control of E.D. Sassoon and Company in 1924, Victor made a bold decision. He shifted the family's focus from India to Shanghai. Victor was a fascinating character, a playboy who walked with crutches after a World War I airplane accident, yet possessed sharp business instincts. He built the Cathay Hotel on the Bund, the grandest hotel east of Suez, where he entertained Charlie Chaplin, Noel Coward, and the international elite. He threw legendary parties and cultivated an image of glamorous decadence. But Victor's greatest legacy came from an unexpected place: compassion. In the late 1930s, as Nazi persecution intensified, Jewish refugees desperately sought escape from Europe. Country after country closed their borders. The 1938 Evian Conference, called to address the refugee crisis, resulted in virtually every nation refusing to accept Jews fleeing Hitler. Only the Dominican Republic and Shanghai remained open. Shanghai became the port of last resort for approximately 18,000 to 20,000 Jewish refugees. And Victor Sassoon, along with other Baghdadi Jewish families like the Kadoris, stepped up. He opened one of his luxury buildings as a reception center for arrivals. His hotel's basement kitchen served thousands of meals daily to refugees. He worked with Japanese authorities who controlled much of Shanghai to prevent expulsion of the refugees. In history's strange ironies, the descendants of a family that had profited from addiction helped save thousands from genocide. Victor Sassoon's grandfather had built an empire on human suffering. Victor himself helped prevent another form of human destruction. But history wasn't finished with the Sassoons. When communist forces entered Shanghai in 1949, they nationalized all foreign assets. Victor's real estate empire, his factories, his hotels, everything was seized. The gamble on China had failed catastrophically. Victor fled to the Bahamas, his fortune largely gone, never to return to China. The Sassoon business empire essentially ended there. Within 3 generations of David's death, the family dynasty had collapsed. They had failed to plan for the long term, failed to truly diversify, and failed to maintain the work ethic that built the fortune. The adage that family dynasties lose their wealth by the 3rd generation proved tragically accurate.
Today, you can still see the Sassoon name across Asia.
In Mumbai, the David Sassoon Library stands as a Gothic landmark, the Sassoon Docks remain in operation. In Shanghai, the Peace Hotel still welcomes guests on the Bund, though few visitors know it was once Sassoon House, headquarters of an opium empire. But the family itself has faded into relative obscurity. The Rothschilds endured, the Kadoris thrived, building business empires that exist to this day. But the Sassoons, once the wealthiest family in Asia, are largely forgotten outside academic circles. Perhaps that's fitting. Their story is too uncomfortable for simple celebration, too complex for easy condemnation. They were refugees who became empire builders, devout Jews who dealt in addiction, philanthropists whose fortune came from human misery, victims of persecution who helped create China's century of humiliation. The Sassoons prove that history is rarely clean, that wealth and morality don't always align, that you can build hospitals and destroy lives with the same money, that being oppressed doesn't prevent you from becoming an oppressor. Their empire rose on the back of opium, and it fell when that opium trade ended. Everything they built, the buildings, the businesses, the British titles, couldn't survive without the drug at its foundation. Today, as we reckon with modern pharmaceutical companies and the opioid epidemic, the Sassoon story feels uncomfortably relevant. The Sackler family built a fortune on OxyContin, and now museums are removing their names from buildings. The Sassoons did the same thing, just on a global scale over a century earlier. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The difference, the Sassoons had the British Empire behind them. They had governments willing to go to war to protect their business interests. They operated in an era when addiction was poorly understood and imperial ambitions trumped moral concerns. But at the end of the day, whether it's 1850 or 2020, the equation remains the same. Some people profit immensely from human suffering, and those profits can build empires, cities, and legacies, but they can't wash away the blood that paid for them. The Sassoons weren't kings or conquerors, but they ruled an empire all the same. An empire built on addiction, maintained through political manipulation, and ultimately destroyed by its own foundations. Their name may be forgotten, but their impact on China, on Shanghai, on the global trade networks that still shape our world, that remains. Walk the Bund in Shanghai, and you're walking through a city they helped build. Look at China's modern relationship with the West, still shaped by memories of the century of humiliation, and you're seeing echoes of the Sassoon era. They were the family who turned human suffering into history's most controversial fortune, and in the end, that fortune couldn't save them from history's judgment or from being forgotten by the very world they helped create.